tree on fire? What am I?
Yeah, it is. It was. I found a bunch of really crazy non-photoshopped images that I felt like these are random enough to share. 23 seconds. Exceptional Randos Show is produced live in Sunroom Studios' Base Capsule and in partnership with KLST 103.5, RadioCallisti.org. Remember to catch our Exceptional Randos live stream on YouTube every Sunday between 2 and 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And if you have a story, idea, or question that you would like to share, we want to hear from you. Thanks for listening.
Wow, that was random. Exceptional Radio.
Hey, good afternoon. It's Sunday, the 28th of June. It's 75 degrees, but it feels like 75 degrees. We've got visibility for about 9 miles, and the barometer says 29.83 inches. Humidity's at 91%, and the dew point's at 70 degrees, meaning if you come inside after being outside and your air conditioner's set to 70 or below, water is going to condense on you. So, last week, one of our listeners, one of our randos, said he wanted a shirt, an exceptional rando shirt. And so Daniel and I were talking about this. Chris and I were actually talking about this too, but last night Daniel and I were talking about this, having a kind of a rando brainstorm session. And it occurred to me that, you know, we feature the globe. That's like the big image we got here. And so I thought, well, what if we had a deconstructed globe and put those images on a shirt? And that way the Rando Nation itself could, sew together their own globe. And this would actually be kind of crazy, actually. You'd have to buy like 30 or so shirts so you get all the pieces. And you'd have to sacrifice the shirts, so you might end up having to buy another shirt so you could wear one. But, the idea is you cut out the section and you sew them all together, and then you stuff the globe with all the t-shirt remnants to complete the globe. And this could be used as like a beanbag or something. But of all the harebrained ideas we have, I feel like this one actually qualifies as a pretty damn good one.
Yeah, absolutely. Viewing the world from different angles, from a variety of angles, from, may I say, random angles, and then combining those into one single globe that could be the size of a beach ball, regardless of the size of the shirt that you purchase or receive or whatever.
Oh yeah, the sections would be the same size no matter what size shirt you bought. So you're not going to get to build a bigger globe by buying extra large or triple XL shirts. You're just going to end up with more material to stuff inside the globe once you're done sewing it together.
Right.
I think
make sure it'd be an instructional exercise for yourself as well, to learn how to sew if you don't know how.
Well, I think everyone's got a lot of extra time on their hands these days because, trying to stay safe from COVID it's definitely something that requires additional activities. It's not just enough to stay home. You got to work on mental health. You got to keep yourself occupied. During the first phase of containment, I remember seeing a lot of tweets that were basically amounted to, like, if you're not doing these things, you're not doing enough. And these were just some influencers on Twitter. And I thought to myself, like, why are we listening to some random person on Twitter about the interests that we should be cultivating ourselves? People have their own interests. They should.
Right. Absolutely. And this is something that we've touched on in the past, is people engaging themselves in hobbies or interests based off of the ideas of other people. People.
Are we losing Daniel?
Identify. what they think is interesting for themselves. Or losing me?
Yeah, you might want to switch to just audio. That's why I turned my audio off.
Yeah,
my video off.
It'll consume less bandwidth and ensure that you have greater stability of your audio signal.
Yeah. Sorry, what were you saying, Daniel?
I was getting at how people have a hard time identifying what their personal interests are unless somebody is indicating to them what those interests should be. They look to these influencers to set the tone or set the path, and then they follow it. It kind of ties into the concept of FOMO and manufactured hobbies, manufactured interests. And essentially you have people telling a group of people what they should be doing in order to perpetuate a capitalistic system that lines the pockets of those determining what the popular interests are, and making people feel bad for not necessarily being interested in those same things.
Right. Yeah, there's definitely something to that cycle of, part of it is FOMO, but also part of it is developing tribal affiliations so you can have xenophobia to say, oh, whether it's Star Wars and Star Trek or Mac and, Samsung or IBM or whatever. There's all these capitalist affiliations that are obviously arbitrary and constructed, but when people are not aware of them, it makes it a lot more difficult to pull people out of those paradigms. Because one of the more recent ones is the console wars. Console wars are so stupid. It's so frustrating to see people argue over something that they buy, that they have no stake in the company, and then, defend it as if they built the machine. And then, because again, it's like, if you look at an Xbox versus a PlayStation, they're both personal computers that are gaming computers.
They're only for you too.
What's that?
They're completely configured for you on the back end. Like you can't upgrade these things.
Right.
Well, you can, but it's really difficult.
Systems. And they have very limited capability. You can't do a PowerPoint presentation on your PS4 or PS5. Not to say that someone buys it for that purpose, but what people are not understanding when they get stuck in these console wars is that they're basically just buying a stripped down computer in a mass-produced case that then, because it has a name PlayStation, they're calling it a console when it's really a computer. And it's like there's these false articulations of something being purchasable in a different class because they've developed false hierarchies of purchasing what's the word? Ease of access and also prestige. People are buying prestige ultimately, and that's why they want to argue about their iPhone versus the Samsung or the PS4 versus the Xbox. And it's like, whether it's clothing brands or car brands, the predisposition to try to articulate that the brand that you purchased is somehow better than someone else's purchase, or then you can identify with someone who also purchases your brand to be part of a club. It's a false. It's an easy way to get into tribes that doesn't necessitate actual work. Well, work towards the tribe, I guess, in the sense of, you may have to, some people have to work to get that money to buy the iPhone or whatever, but a lot of people don't necessarily, so we can't say that people get their money from work. So that's not, we're not equating people who have money with necessarily people who work hard, because that's a false paradigm again.
Yeah, and a lot of cell phones are heavily subsidized. like
Mm-hmm.
extremely subsidized.
Yep.
I really don't think people are going out there and dropping $1,000 on a device that they intend to upgrade or replace in a year to a year and a half. I mean, I know that there are people such as myself that have an aging phone, and it has yet to fail me. It just does what I need it to do. But I'm also surrounded by computers all day, and I would rather use a computer than thumb through everything on my fondle slab.
So, like, my last device I got was in 2013, and I got insurance on it for like 4 years. And once it passed the plan, I was gonna ride that phone out until it was completely unusable. And I finally got a new device, and I'm
took
probably
3
gonna have
years.
this one for 7 years.
It took 7
And-
years. 7 years with one
Yeah.
device. That's incredible. You know, speaking of long-term devices, I have a computer system the processor was delivered in 2011. The motherboard was delivered shortly before that, actually, and so I'm using essentially a 9-year-old computer system, and it has yet to reach the performance cap. And the only time I ever see it, and we were talking about this the other day, is when I'm using Facebook, and it's not even my CPU that's hit hard; it's just the GPU. And this shit blows my mind.
Well, and we were discussing this amongst ourselves. I'm obsessive about monitoring everything, whether it's my intake, to my weight, to my computer's temperatures. So I notice when my GPU or CPU spikes. And I also have specific machines that I use for specific functions. So I only use Facebook on one machine. And this machine, whenever I use Facebook, it will spike on the CPU and the GPU on mine. But it's like one of those things where if I was not obsessive about monitoring things to know, because the issue is when you troubleshoot, you have to know how many variables you're dealing with to know where the problem came from. And what I'm realizing is some people are troubleshooters by nature, and some people need to hire troubleshooters. So I'm the troubleshooter that people hire. So in my own environment, my own systems are so heavily monitored that if something even triggers any sort of change, I'm going to know it because that's just how I monitor my own system. So Facebook, it's one of these things where it eats up your system so much that I think a lot of people use Facebook in a way that they won't necessarily even notice it because they'll have 10 or 15 tabs open. So you'll feel like your computer is slowing down because you have a bunch of tabs open, when really it's just Facebook. And sometimes it may be CNN or Fox News, or I'm not assuming our audience watches or pays attention to Fox News necessarily, but I monitor Fox News to see what kind of bullshit they're saying. So maybe some people do that as well, because you always have to keep your enemies closer. So it's one of those things where Fox News doesn't eat my CPU and GPU in the same way that Facebook do. Fox News eats it sometimes, but Facebook, it's just one of these things where there's something that they're doing that is using my computer's resources in a way that goes beyond the most intense game that you can play on the computer. Nothing makes my computer run as hot as Facebook does. Literally nothing I do. And it's one of those things that's disconcerting because when your machine is running 212, 220 degrees and you're not really doing anything, it's like, what the fuck is going on? So that's why I'm looking at the temperatures my machine is hitting just having Facebook open. And now I'm talking about it with Tien and Daniel saying, what's going on your, is the same thing happening to your guys' machines? And it's when other people are having the same experience, now I know it's not just my imagination. So this is how you start to overcome conspiratorial thought and confirm it with other people, just for the audience's sake. So when you're starting to say, is this shit happening to me? If you think something's happening to you, see if it's happening to other people, because this shit is real. You know, I noticed ads popping up for shit I would talk about in conversation like over a decade ago.
Yeah.
And I started talking about it with my friends, and they would say, you know, I don't necessarily see it, but some would say they saw it. And then I was in my head saying, oh, maybe this is just me being crazy. Turns out, no, it wasn't me being crazy. Yes, Google and other platforms were monitoring your microphones to then send ads to you. So you have to be aware, but also keep your conspiracies in check by just checking with other people.
You know, it's completely in real time. Because last week well, I'm even not sure what we were even talking about. Actually, it went by so quickly. We talk about a lot of things. We talk about marketing. We talk about web design, graphic design. We talk about music. And whenever we're doing the show, if I go look at my regular feed, sometimes the things that we talk about get picked up probably by my phone. And next thing I know, I see ads, sponsored ads for that stuff in my feed. We were talking about music production at one point, and now I'm seeing lots and lots of sponsored ads for, do you want to be a music producer? Become a music producer in Indiana in 30 days. It's like, really? 30 days? Holy crap. That's like absolute lie right there.
Right, yeah, that's complete bullshit.
Become a music producer in 30 days. Maybe if you've already got like decades worth of investment in time and training, 30 days, that's a funnel. That's a horrible, deep, dark funnel too. It leads to probably some kind of Ponzi scheme. So, what you were saying about phones though, like that's the way it should be. People should be using their phones until it literally cannot handle the next upgrade or cannot run the software that's being used. It should be about the software that's being used, and that's the context. What kind of applications do you actually run, and what are their requirements? That's the reason.
My screen was unusable for 6 months before, because my phone was connected to my watch.
Oh,
and because
that's
I could still use it on my watch, I just didn't even bother to get a new phone, because I'm like, I don't need one yet. Even though the screen is completely unusable, I can still use the functions on my phone. And people were having a hard time understanding my logic. And I'm just like, no, just trust me. I'm the tech guy. Trust me. I don't need a phone yet because I can still use it. Even though the phone is black, it will not turn on. It will not light up.
Actually, remember
see
that.
anything on the screen. I can still access it, so I don't need a new one yet.
No, I remember that you came over one day and you just set your phone on the table and something happened and you just were doing it all on your watch. And it was this really interesting moment because that was the first time I realized that you had a smartwatch. And lo and behold, the fondle slab is no longer a handhold device. It's just something you keep in your pocket or something you put on the table or even just leave in your backpack. It's just an access point now. And then the smartphone takes over all the truly necessary functions that a phone is supposed to provide. It provides voice, it provides text, some of them even have cameras. And so I think that there's potential to get away from the fondle slab culture while still retaining access to the immediate needs that a mobile device provides.
Yeah, and I think what ended up happening is people started using their phone for things that a desktop or laptop is better at, such as surfing Facebook. So if I'm ever on Facebook, it's on my computer because it's such a better experience. And I don't know if people realize the difference between something that's optimized for a mobile device versus optimized for a computer. Because even when I'm on my cell phone, I'll go to the browser and switch it to be optimized for a desktop because it's just a better experience. But most phones automatically set your browser to a mobile device. So unless you switch it back over to desktop, whenever you're looking at something, whether it's CNN or Facebook, it's optimized for your phone, which is, for your phone is not bad, but the desktop surfing experience is so much better. And that's where people, I think, there's this culture of allowing a designer to give you your experience and not taking control of that experience enough to feel empowered to design your own environment. And that's fine. I get that. Those people purchase their aesthetics, they purchase their design settings. There's nothing wrong with that. But the issue is when you're an individual, you just can't get it perfect for you. So if you don't learn how to refine your stuff for yourself, you're going to be getting a mass produced setting that's going to be 85% for you, but there's just 15% that if you took the time to modify it and learn how to modify it for yourself, your experience would be so much better. And I think that's where there is an intimidation factor that people don't like. You know, again, people pay me to get over that intimidation factor, and that's fine because, you know, that gives me money. But I wish they could just do it themselves, because then that would be a different society.
Well,
it would just be a different society altogether.
That bulk configuration caters to the lowest common denominator. It caters to the audience that has the least number of requirements and the least number of demands. And worse, it fosters this environment where people become complacent with what's going on, and then they accept that that's the standard, and then they don't notice when really gradual changes happen. And so this is really a really pervasive concept. The slower the changes are made and the less noticeable they are, the less likely we are to complain about them. And we are being presented with a sliding political system and a sliding media presentation of that political system, and it makes it really difficult to tell if our media is truly fact-based and honest in their delivery and attempting to present as minimally biased reporting as possible, or if they're just softening the blow of the party line and just preparing us to accept whatever happens.
Well, I think that latter is definitely more in line with it, partially because it involves dumbing down in a way that makes people feel more informed and more empowered than they actually are. Because, you know, I did an installation today, and what you're saying makes me think of this person where, you know, I'm installing a security system for someone who's got a $20,000 fucking rug, but they are not literate enough to install their own security system, where it's not that difficult in the way that the security systems are done. If you know how to use a smartphone, which this person had, you should be able to do it, but it's just intimidating enough as to where I will often try to help, like, let people walk themselves through it, and they can't do it because of the way things are set up. It's just slightly intimidating enough as to where they need a professional to come in and do it for them. But then also, again, this person is surrounded by probably $250,000 maybe $500,000 worth of things to make them feel powerful and like a powerful person, but they can't install this shit, so they have to pay somebody to do it, and society makes them feel okay for not being aware enough to install the shit that's going to protect themselves. And it's like, you can buy a gun, you don't necessarily have to buy the training. As long as you have the gun, society's going to say you're protecting your place. But if you don't know how to install a security system, society doesn't care as long as you have the gun. So there's all these disconnected things that will give people passes to say, oh, you have seven children in your house. You have a gun, you tried to protect them. You didn't go buy a security system and try to install it yourself because you were too intimidated. So if your house got broken into and you lost one of your kids because you couldn't get to your gun in time, society's going to say it's okay because you had that gun instead of having the security system that would have given you the capacity to have a panic room and all these other, there's all these things where it's like society will rationalize all these things that are irrational just because enough people agree on it.
You know, I saw this really clever, I guess it's a way to program your what are they called? What's that Amazon protocol that they've got where you can get Amazon to listen to you? Shit. So Amazon has their smart home system.
Like Alexa?
That's it. So Amazon has their own smart home system where they're Alexa connected devices, and you can tell Alexa to turn on the rooms and the light in a room, or you can tell Alexa to change the temperature. You can tell Alexa to unlock your doors, actually. You can integrate Alexa into a whole list of electronics, including Roomba, the robot vacuum cleaner. And so apparently someone shared this whole program, and it might be fake, it might just be a joke, but it could very well be true, because Alexa is actually a very complex system for smart home control. And so the idea is you say, Alexa, intruder alert, initiate Claymore Roomba. And so the picture is of a Roomba with a Claymore strapped to the top of it, using the camera to identify moving objects. That's a little extra hardcore, probably very illegal. But there's a way to incorporate a security system into a smart system, a smart home that's connected to your phone. And you could have a system like that adjusted to send alerts to devices.
Those are kind of install.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And that's the thing. This stuff is out there. It requires a little bit of research and a little bit of reading. And reading is the really key. That's the key element to this. You got to read the instructions.
Yep, and nobody wants to do that, and that's why they pay me to install them. And this is what I get. It's like, yeah, I guess I'm fine getting paid to do this shit for people, but all they have to do is read the instructions, and that's the craziest shit about it, man.
Well, they're also paying you for your expertise and the fact that you've done this a significant number of times and are very familiar and fluent with the settings. And so you can configure the settings rapidly, and that's what they want. They want to pay you for your time. Yep,
and that's part of it. And that's, and that's ultimately when I'm doing this stuff for people, that's what I tell them, in that, yeah, they could do it, and it might take them a day. And that's the difference. If you have a day, you can do this shit for yourself.
Yeah.
But if you feel like you don't have a day to spare, fucking pay somebody to do it in an hour. And those, both of those are valid perspectives. So I don't belittle people who pay. I'll just take their money and do it,
Yeah. The funny thing about it is, during that entire day of reading up on a system and understanding the complexities of proper configuration, you can also do a bunch of other things, like cook or listen to music or take breaks and tell jokes to your friends on Facebook. It's not like it's I'm not sure if that day spent doing that, I guess it comes down to how much people value their time and how much they're willing to pay somebody else to do it.
Yeah, I mean, I just rebuilt my computer. I turned on that 70s show, opened a beer, and rebuilt the computer. And it's like,
that sounds like an awesome afternoon.
Yeah, and that's how you do it. You don't have to stress about shit. Walk away when you encounter frustration, have another beer, go back to it, watch more 70s show. It's like, people make this shit out as if it's something that needs to be stressful, but it can really be fun.
Yeah.
Well, that's where we get into people being able to manage their stress and identify the root causes of it. When they're not taking the time to learn how to implement these systems for themselves, or they don't fully understand that they inherently possess the capacity to educate themselves. We also can consider where that's coming from. How were they educated in the first place? Are they specialists in one area and feel that they can't be specialists in another? Do they feel that they don't have enough space in their own mind to fill with this area of expertise? Or is it a byproduct of instant gratification and service culture in and of itself, that they feel that they don't have to necessarily holistically educate themselves, and they can simply focus on the one thing that allowed them to have the $250,000 or $500,000 worth of stuff surrounding them, to indicate either a false hierarchy within a society that demonstrates that because you have all of these material possessions, you are inherently more successful than another person, and you don't have to learn how to do these things yourself, or you don't necessarily have to educate yourself any further beyond the result of being able to gain a possession. So If we talk about you simply possess a weapon or a firearm or whatever it is that you feel that is necessary in order to defend yourself in your own home, simply having that and not necessarily training with it, if you are if you are necessarily rationalizing taking responsibility for your own security by simply having something that you don't necessarily know how to use, which is kind of what you're getting into, Chris, when you talk about how you're called upon to install these security systems for people who don't necessarily know how to use them, or people only educating themselves on how to use the basic factory settings based applications or tools or fondle slabs, as we like to call them, that people receive. That there isn't an emphasis on any level of education beyond this is what you get, and you use it for these specific things, and you don't necessarily have to use it for anything else.
Yeah, and you described a lot of things that are relevant to analyze American culture, but also in that when we start to deconstruct some of the things that you discuss, it perfectly breaks down why people who become specialists in something and then become comfortable by their perceived successes start to then drag down our capacity to perceive what true success in progressing our species actually is, because we get too wrapped up in what individual success has been defined as in this very small epoch of time. So then, one of the things that we go back and forth to Renaissance men or people being desirable traits, but then how we describe those also has then now become wrapped up in monetary success as well. So I was discussing with a friend just yesterday, how much money does one need to make? We're so worried about what's the most we can make as a society. Very, very few people ask the question, how much does one actually need to make as a person working in this construct? And then, one of the things that I love seeing right now is the people that had the chance to then get put in a situation where they can be back at home with their family doing, the least amount necessary to then understand that once you can get to the least amount necessary to pay all your bills, all your rest of your free time is basically time with your loved ones. And that was basically, people thought that they had to work towards the upper end to buy that free time, not realizing that if you did the least, then you get the most amount of time with your loved ones in the end. And in that, when people start investing in themselves and start doing their own businesses and taking the skills they have and applying them to, say, be their own bosses, because it's like, if you've been doing something for someone else as a skill, it's very possible you can just freelance and do that shit yourself. And I'm seeing more and more people in my friend circle start to set up their own businesses in a way where I'm like, fuck yes, you guys are the next wave of America, in that we hit the point of diminishing returns for corporatocracy. We've clearly hit the point of diminishing returns. We've hit the too big to not fail point. So now we need to start going towards the other end, where we're saying people need to find their skills and go into business for themselves. That's the least amount of overhead you can possibly have. Work out of your home if you can. Work on site as frequently as you need to and as little as you possibly can to diminish your exposure to viruses, to shootings, to mass shootings. There's all these things that this new paradigm can then put, you get more time with your family. And all these things, we've been saying this shit for over a year now. Now we have fucking proof. And now I'm seeing people actually start to do it in a way where I'm like, I don't care if everybody does it, as long as I know enough of my friends are doing it. Fuck yes, that's all that matters. Like,
Well, it also indicates to us that perceived desirability, or the metrics by which we measure what is desirable to us in our lives, or we'll just say collectively what's perceived as desirable in an American life, or someone trying to pursue the ever elusive and ever changing and ever inflating American dream, is based off of perceived necessity. And we look at who is generating the ideas that influence what people perceive as a necessity or what is necessary. So going back to what we were talking about with the consoles or with the phones or with the competing technological items, or essentially for many people, these are just toys or indicators of a false hierarchy within their own subculture that they use to establish status. What is really necessary to them in order to live a successful life or to have a successful life, and what is desirable in order to achieve those things that are necessary in order to live your life.
That's actually that's something that I consider a lot. Like, what do I actually need? Do I actually need to get some kind of new? Do I need a video card to counteract the intensity of the churning that Facebook causes on one of my machines? Or do I just do what Chris suggests and use one of my laptops and dedicate that to general web browsing and general social interaction on the internet? I mean, obviously, I don't need to buy a different piece of hardware to integrate into my already complex computer system. I just need to use one of my other tools. And speaking of which, I think it's just enough to have a device. That's all you need. You just need to be able to communicate and share. I have an absurdly complex system to integrate Zoom so that we can facilitate the show, and then all the other audio systems and hardware devices that I use to control the sound. But these things aren't actually necessary. Like so I know a lot of people that are just using like a USB microphone and some headphones. That's Daniel and Chris right there. And the sound quality that we're able to achieve is, granted, it's due in part largely to this additional processing that I'm applying on my end. But I've heard, hundreds of podcasts and just shows on YouTube where that stuff isn't there. And here's the thing. Content will always trump delivery. It doesn't matter how polished it is. If it's a turd, it's a turd. But if the content's there, that's fine. Sometimes I think it's good. It's funny. I like to complain about the way telephone kind of voice sounds, because to me it sounds like someone's talking through a tin can. But the reality is that's the standard for a lot of people. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's what it sounds like. And so most people won't notice. I notice because I'm neurotic about sound. But not everyone's like that. And I've come to accept that. And so what do we actually need? Do we need that prestige automobile? Well, no, but it's nice. I'm not going to complain. I like getting into a car with really nice, well-made seats with leather upholstery, and the design of the interior makes me feel like I'm in a very nice space. I like that. I like it when the sound system in the car is better than what you expect, and so you can feel the music when you need to. Or if the vehicle is designed in such a way so when you open the windows, it doesn't buff it so much, so you don't get that sensation that you're being slapped by the wind. But those things aren't actually necessary. Kia is a great example of a company. Kia and Hyundai, really, they're an example of a company that listens to their core market. And they realize, hey, these people need vehicles. They're not trying to spend a bunch of money. Let's make them the best vehicle possible. And lo and behold, they have one of the best electric vehicles on the market right now. And somehow their batteries last longer than everyone else's for the same size and weight. They charge faster. They get better range. So clearly there's a way to do all of these things without catering to the illusion that it has to be the best of the best of the best. Sometimes the best thing is the thing that works and is accessible.
And sometimes the best thing is the healthiest thing too.
Yeah.
And there seem to be a lot of expectations that have been established through popular culture and through the perpetuation of certain ideals in the media, as well as how the media presents what we commonly refer to as news. I mean, sometimes you have a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week news station presenting ideas where a lot of it's just conjecture, and the injection of ideas into somebody's brain, that's available to them 24 hours a day. So that way they have all of these conjectures to keep them on edge all the time and to keep them stressed out or to keep them guessing or to continually establish the societal expectations and ideals, because a lot of these stations have commercials on them too, which they get paid to put into their ad space. And then you have all of this anxiety and all of this angst and all of this bad news essentially being presented to the viewers by the millions, who then go about making their purchasing decisions and are influenced by the ads that they see en masse by the millions. And all of a sudden you have a culture of consumerism that's perpetuated by the desire to seek information and to better your life based off of what you believe is reliable, without actually understanding or doing the reading yourself, as we've discussed in regards to the installation of security systems or purchasing computers for oneself, or being able to actually understand the applications that somebody is using. Well, the same goes for the decision to make certain purchases, or the decision to buy into the status-based hierarchical frameworks and templates that are established by mass media and the capitalistically driven goals and directives that continue to perpetuate and self-perpetuate the ideas that people just buy into on a regular basis.
Yeah, and this gets back into the danger of having information authorities, period, because people will, look at some of these gadget people or car people like Top Gear, for example. Top Gear is an awesome show, but it gets super dangerous when, it's only dangerous in this setting because people don't understand how to navigate information in many cases. But I just don't, I would not be as worried about people's capacity to not resist influence if it weren't for the fact that they're not really taught correctly how to understand media manipulation. And I think TM pointed out the movie Wag the Dog in a online discussion at one point. But there's a film that came out in the 90s, for people who haven't seen it, called Wag the Dog, that's very good about framing how media manipulation works in American context specifically. And it uses a character that's loosely based on Bill Clinton, Governor Bill Clinton at the time. Well, in the movie, he's supposed to be Governor Bill Clinton, which is really crazy how much this movie nailed upon things that our society was not yet ready to handle discussing, including how women were being treated at the time. But this movie is really interesting just because it shows how media manipulation works from one point to the rest of the media. So it's not just, sending out a memo. All you have to do is put out a piece of juicy media and everybody's going to run with it. So I don't know if people remember when, what was it? John Edwards got caught cheating on his wife that had cancer. And it basically torpedoed his fucking campaign. But it was first reported by It was either the Young Turks or TMZ reported it first. One of those two. It was not a mainstream media source, but because it was not mainstream media, everybody was questioning it first, and then when it came out that it was true, it became this big issue of like now people don't know what to think because what they thought was fringe media or just paparazzi now basically torpedoed a fucking viable candidate for president. John Edwards was a totally viable candidate for president until that point, and that shit just torpedoed his career. And I think what's really difficult is people are trained not to have long memories. So if you forget the John Edwards incident, it's really easy to forget how we got to a point where it's really difficult to know what media is credible. Because, you know, if TMZ says it, you kind of have to take them seriously now because they fucked up John Edwards.
Well, you know, on a much smaller scale, they did the same thing to Howard Dean. He made this weird face. This was, I think, it was during the time of the Lord of the Rings movies when they were all, you know, still kind of in the forward collective consciousness. He made a face and laughed about something, and I don't even remember what it was.
It was beyond. Dave Chappelle did a whole skit about it.
But then he became
did a whole skit about it.
Then he became Smeagol Dean, and they likened him to Smeagol, who was, you know, gonna go crazy and then turn on everyone. It was
and everybody on the left just let it happen. I remember all the people on the left be like, I don't know now, because Howard Dean dared show emotion on stage. That's what happened. He showed emotion. And we were at a time when men were not allowed to show emotion, so he lost his campaign.
They did the same thing to Buttigieg.
Be emotional.
They did the same thing to Buttigieg when he was eating some fried chicken, which I don't care who you are. If you don't like fried chicken, you better have like a serious allergy to some kind of product used in the preparation. And then it's up to you to figure out how to replace that. But fried chicken's damn good. And it doesn't matter where you're from. There should be no reason to make fun of somebody for eating fried chicken, but he was eating it in such a way that it reminded people of that moment when Gollum bites Frodo's finger off to get the ring. And it's one of those times where, man, that was really unnecessary. That's a low blow. Also, doing that to somebody eating fried chicken, which is one of, like, you know, the great gifts of the universe, fuck those people.
It's such an immature way to make fun of somebody, too. Like, oh, let me just draw this very basic comparison to a character that I see in literature in a movie, using somebody else's ideas and visual representations to draw a conclusion about somebody's fitness to run the country. I mean, it's kind of illogical and doesn't make any sense. And it actually kind of highlights the level of critical thinking and also the maturity level of you know, a lot of the people who are making their decisions about who should run the nation. It's a little concerning.
Yeah, you know, I think part of that too is just this culture of making fun of people. It's justified for multiple reasons. Like, if they don't politically agree with you, then it's okay to make fun of them. If they're overweight, then it's okay to make fun of them. If they're, you know, at this point, it's not as okay to be trans or to make fun of trans people. But, you know, 10 years ago, if they were trans, it'd be okay to make fun of them. 20 years ago, if they were gay, it'd be okay to make fun of them. And now, you know, this is, I think, a good point. You see all these companies removing their episodes of blackface. It's like, what left-wing, quote-unquote, television show didn't do an episode about blackface? And that's where you get these people who think of themselves as being progressive because they only do blackface once every 5 years. And because it's a woke version of blackface, it's okay. Now realizing, yeah, it was never okay. And that's where there's all this latent racism that we're addressing on all sides that you know, even down to, I don't know if people realize, like, 30 Rock, or not 30 Rock, Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt. There's a very, very long red face story arc where it's like, oh, it's just, oh, it's awkward to even discuss.
Was
like
it season 2?
I think it starts in season 2, but it goes through the rest of the series.
I couldn't watch season 2 of Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt, but
It's a funny show,
Yeah.
but again, there's all these, you know, in all of our media, there's all of these racist things that people who are the farthest left we have in Hollywood or in the media are still doing red face. They're still doing blackface. They're still doing, you know, you had Alison Brie coming out and apologizing for voicing a Vietnamese American character. Why did she have to apologize? She never should have, you know.
yeah.
The fact that they thought it was okay to do these things. The dude that played Cleveland Brown for 20 years. He shouldn't have been playing Cleveland Brown.
These are also decisions that are made by casting directors, by the producers,
Right.
by the writers. They all have a say in how these things pan out. And recently, I read that there are some animated series where they have biracial characters that have been voiced by white actresses, and those actresses are stepping down from their role, saying that they are now aware of the kind of impact that has on biracial communities and biracial people, to see their image used to facilitate some storyline, but then cast somebody who's not biracial in the role. And so in one of these instances, and I'm not going to say anything about what the show is, because I don't really think that's actually the important part. The important part is...
I do think it's important. We should call it out because it's Big Mouth and Jenny Slate.
Yeah.
So
true.
when you have the, you know, I'll let you go, but we definitely need to call it out because
Yeah.
I like the show.
But I
there's
don't
an
like
issue.
those shows. So I don't want to give them too much
I'm
airtime.
a fan of the show. I
Yeah.
still like the show, but I'm glad they did it themselves.
Yeah, well,
Because
the director for one of them tried to defend the decision to not use a biracial voice actor at the onset, but now have come back around, and they realize that what they said and their decision was wrong, and they're trying to make amends for it. And, you know, that's great. I think that's fine. I still... those shows still didn't get my attention before, and they're not going to get my attention now. But, you know, good for them. I'm happy they're doing it.
well, and again, it's like the whole reason I want to call it out is because they have black people on the show.
Yeah.
But when you realize one of the two black people is literally playing a stereotype of a black person, it becomes problematic that they then cast a white person to play a biracial person, because then it's this term of they're trying to appease the expectations of a white audience, and then they get to define what's acceptable behavior for black people for the white audience.
Or
And then on
biracial
the flip
people in
side,
general.
then you get shows like Bob's Burgers casting Tiffany Haddish, who, it bothers me that she plays into a stereotype. I don't know if that's her personality or not, but she plays up the stereotype in a way that becomes problematic for black people. Because when you see shit like the Last OG, where she's just like, she plays a stereotype for Hollywood, and that's all they let her do. So when the black people are relegated to stereotypes, and then non-black people play the non-stereotypical black people, it becomes problematic, because then black actors aren't getting non-stereotypical black roles. So then you get Idris Elba playing the magical Negro in the fucking Marvel universe, but this dude is a fucking like
Magical.
talented, like the most talented actor on the planet. You got him playing fucking Heimdall. I like Heimdall. Don't get me wrong, the character is great, but you relegated one of the most talented motherfuckers on the planet to goddamn Heimdall. Fuck out of here, Hollywood. Fuck out of here, Hollywood. Because then they're trying to give us Black Captain America in 2020 with reparations. That ain't reparations, y'all. I love what you're doing, giving us Black Captain America, But this is, oh, we'll take off Aunt Jemima. We'll give you Black Captain America. We'll fucking, yeah, we'll give Idris Elba a better role next time. Trust us. He won't be the magical Negro. Guess what? That's not reparations. It's not woke, and it's obvious. It's all of these hollow gestures that if they had black people in positions where they valued their opinion, this shit never would have happened in the fucking first place.
Yeah.
It's so transparent as a black person. I'm glad they're doing it. Don't get me wrong, but I'm not fooled by any of this shit.
Well, I think we also have to take a look at the long-term behavior of the industry because, as you've said, people's attention spans are very, very limited, and people aren't taught to retain information, especially if it makes them uncomfortable. They like to en masse go back to a very comfortable state and feel like they're doing everything right in their lives. And is this change in the dynamic of giving us a Black Captain America, getting rid of Aunt Jemima, reshaping the consumer corporate landscape in response to public outcry and various political movements in this current moment? Is that going to be long-standing, or is it just a temporary attempt at appeasement that will basically be just a flash in the pan and be overshadowed by other problems that the media or the consumer leaders in the country decide is more important?
Isn't everything a flash in the pan in this country? I mean, it sure seems like it.
Well, and then, it's a flash in the pan for the older generation, but the young kids are, now that all these TV shows with blackface are getting removed, younger kids will be offended by blackface in a way that adults right now are not offended by blackface. And that's the only way to affect change, I believe, in that blackface should make people's stomachs turn. It shouldn't be something that you're okay seeing. When those episodes of that episode of Office aired originally, the whole, the blackface episode is a joke about blackface not being acceptable, but the fact that they felt comfortable making that joke should make people feel uncomfortable. Good you feel uncomfortable that they felt comfortable making that joke. That's how we move past a society that's comfortable making that joke. So that's what I'm like. I don't like, okay, it's Tropic Thunder. You can't cancel that movie in that you can't unproduce it and unpublish it. But the way Tropic Thunder handled blackface was so intelligent and so nuanced that it was calling out the culture of blackface in a way that had to be done that wasn't being called out. So Tropic Thunder doing that, involving black people in the process, makes it so that when you also understand that the black people in the narrative are also being addressed as being gay black people, to address that this part of the community exists, they're dealing with a lot of hidden communities and a lot of hidden issues in a way that even down to when they talk about the Sean Penn playing the mentally handicapped person.
Yeah, you can't do that.
That is, that's a whole nother issue. So there's all these, like, the blackface is just one issue Tropic Thunder is dealing with, but Tropic Thunder is social commentary wrapped up in comedy in such an intelligent way that we're still unpacking it over a decade later because it's such a well-done film that it's not just mindless blackface for the sake of a punchline.
The best part of
that's the difference.
The best part of the character Kurt Lazarus is that RDJ is pretending to be a blonde-haired, blue-eyed Australian who's having an identity crisis because he's played so many roles and gotten so many awards that he doesn't actually know who he is anymore. And so he actually finds his identity pretending to be another guy. And so there's one line, it's like, you're just a dude pretending to be a dude. But the reality is it's a dude pretending to be a dude in a movie a dude in a movie pretending to be another dude in a movie within the movie pretending to be another dude. So it unpacks this really complex psychological state where they're exploring identity also. It's really just fantastic. They managed to pack that character, just one character, full of so much meta context or meta commentary that, I mean, you're right. We're talking about it right now, but I think that that's part of the reason that you're right. It's such a successful story, such successful character development.
That if it had been anybody but RDJ, it wouldn't have worked. Well, there may have been like a couple of people who could have worked with, but the only reason it worked with RDJ is because in real life, he had been shunned by the white community for his drug use and taken in by the black community. So it's like, ain't nobody in the black community about to cancel no fucking RDJ. He been one of us for fucking 2 decades or more. So anybody who thinks we're about to cancel RDJ, you don't know enough black people. Black people ain't about to cancel him. He one of us. He been one of us.
So speaking of TV shows with that had gone through blackface, the Office blackface scene has been edited out, and Netflix has pulled the Community blackface episode. Those,
dude, it's like I just was on CBR.com. It's like I think 3 or 4 on the front page right now.
Yeah.
And it's happening so quickly. Like, they just pulled a Golden Girls episode. They pulled the Office episode. It's happening too fast where I'm like, oh, yeah, there was a blackface. Oh, yeah, there was a blackface. You just get so used to it. And that's why I'm like, we also need to be calling out the drag face. We need to be calling out the red face. We need to be calling out, all these other faces that people were okay with while we're on the subject. Yeah. Because this shit happens way too frequently for all oppressed people, and now that we're doing it for black people, let's do it for everybody else while we're at it. Let's not make other people's minority existence be a butt of a joke as a society. How crazy is that? How crazy does that sound?
Yeah, it's. I mean, it's not that crazy to me. There's a I can't remember the name of the book now. But this book was published like maybe 10 years ago, and it talks about black and white westerns and cowboy movies and how they would hire Native Americans to provide the role of the Indians in the movies, and they would give them lines. But it would be in English, and they'd say, "Yeah, we want you to say these things," and they'd look at each other and be like, "Okay." But the reality is, in these movies, they were saying things like, "Hey, I had your wife last night," or "God, you're ugly," or something like, "What do you do? Sleep with a donkey?" They would say some really derogatory shit. But because none of these people on the production side could speak Native American languages of any kind, they had no understanding of it whatsoever. They just thought these guys were delivering their lines. And it comes out years later. It's like, holy crap, they were talking mad shit. Nobody knew. And that's the danger, I think, of appropriating culture in that way. When I see some Caucasian person pretending to be Asian on screen, it's like, really? There are like billion fucking Chinese people. There's probably 2 billion Asian people that could have been sourced for this role.
You couldn't find one?
Couldn't find one? There wasn't an Asian person in like Hollywood or Vancouver or wherever they were doing principal filming that they could just have come in for that role. They had to use some white person.
So there's also this argument that I see floating around amongst ignorant racists that when we're talking about acting, we're talking about pretend, right? Like, okay, I get this is not real. No, we're not stupid. We understand that this is not reality. However, the problem becomes when there are actors and actresses of color or of transgender identity or of homosexual identity that are trying to get these roles, giving them to someone who doesn't share that identity.
This is disingenuous.
Produces representation in the actual industry, because the characters become fixtures in people's mind that represent identities, and if they're portrayed by someone who doesn't actually have that identity, that becomes a disservice to that culture or segment of the population, because they don't actually have someone from their demographic representing them to be the representation in people's minds that will forever become identified with that demographic. And that's the danger whether it's a cartoon or live action.
You know, I bet the Venn diagram of everyone that you just described and the overlap of the circle of everyone who freaked out when it was suggested that the next Bond might be Idris Elba or might even be a woman is a circle. I'm willing to bet that's the case.
Oh yeah, no doubt. And those people
Because-
have no idea about the construct of the character.
Like, seriously, in the most recent series of Bond movies with Daniel Craig as Bond, they've set Moneypenny up to be an international Bond, 00. She could very easily step into the role of Bond. She knows all of the accounts. She knows all of the contacts. She knows exactly what was going on. She used to be a field agent, except she shot him in the chest, almost killed him, or in the gut or something. She almost killed him. But that was when she was still young, and now she has more experience. I think Moneypenny 007 would be a really interesting series because just like we saw with Atomic Blonde, Charlize Theron made a fantastic secret agent. Not just a secret, just a double agent, and that was a amazing addition to the secret agent intelligence spook microcosm. I think people are actually might be ready to see Moneypenny kick some ass. We've been waiting for her to kick some ass for what? Forever, 50 years practically. When did Bond come out? See, the first Bond, 63. Yeah, we've been waiting for Moneypenny for 57 years.
Yeah.
Moneypenny should have her time in the spotlight because there's no reason that she shouldn't. We can let the James Bond accounts chill for a little bit or give her access to that money so she can go kick some ass. Think of all the places that Moneypenny would be able to get that Bond wouldn't be able to get, and she wouldn't have to fight her way into those places. They would willingly let her into those places.
Well, and then even that, it's like, why do we need another 00 series? I mean, this is I saw they're talking about doing a remake it's not a full remake. It was misinterpreted. Regardless, when you have these remakes and continuations of series, it makes it seem as if there's no new
writing,
intellectual property of value that can compare to these old things. And it's like James Bond in the 00 concept it's not really relevant anymore.
Yeah, it's true.
It's not really like I don't understand, what is MI6 gonna do in 2020 that can be hidden away from people without them finding out about it on Twitter? This dude was running down through downtown Istanbul. It's fucking shooting an Uzi, and then he hopped on a fucking motor scooter. Like, it's just not possible, man. It's just we hit a point where some of this stuff is just. If you suspend disbelief, you're just basically taking out your brain, and that's why the stuff that's like the Marvel comic book stuff is so over the top. That's where you have to go to actually get to a place where you can suspend disbelief in 2020.
They addressed that.
To me, anyway.
They addressed that in Skyfall when the Bond villain is using technology, and so Q is like, I can do more with my laptop than you can with your your pistol, and there are a few scenes that take place down in central London, and they show MI6 blowing up, and they can't cover that up. But the reality is that the vast majority of the film takes place on an island or out in the Scottish Highlands where nobody's paying attention. And so I think you've actually put the spotlight on the biggest problem of a Bond movie or Bond series or any kind of secret agent story that is contemporary is that there are too many cameras everywhere. Too many people pay attention. And so they almost have to exist in the past or exist in a place in like a wasteland where nobody is around. And that makes for a very difficult story because, I mean, they can't rely on blowing shit up or making cars flip over during a chase. Now it's a foot chase through the woods, and I guess that could be pretty interesting.
Yeah, it's really crazy how much our technology has made it. It's more difficult, I think, to tell stories in that so many problems you start to realize so many problems in especially 90s films were just fabricated arbitrary problems that really, you know, now a cell phone solves 90% of the problems in movies that were in the 90s. And, like Adventures in Babysitting, that movie's awesome, but right
Yeah.
now, you couldn't do that movie.
No.
It would just fall apart in like the first 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Like, oh,
It would be like, beep, beep, beep. Hey, where are you?
yeah.
Turn your location back on so I can come get you. Okay, just stay there. I'll be there. Okay, the Google Maps.
Turn on your video. Let me see where you're at right now.
Google Maps says I'll be there in 30 minutes. Don't go anywhere. If I have to hunt you down once I get there, we're not getting ice cream. That's how Adventures in Babysitting 2020 goes.
Which is also why I think when these movies, they're fantastic glimpses into the past, especially, oh my God, you go back and start to try to watch some of these films, the anti-gay, it's just, you can't even do it. But then then you see the stuff that stands up and you're like, oh, this person was so forward and progressive in a time where other people were just dropping F-bombs willingly to be funny and shit that's not funny now. 30 years later, stuff that was funny then wasn't funny then, but people were willing to laugh because of peer pressure. And I think that's where
I think people overestimate the quality of their sense of humor.
Yep.
And they think things that aren't funny are funny somehow. They somehow convince themselves, and I think that's a reflection of like really fucked up socialization. Yeah, exactly what you said, peer pressure. Daniel mentioned something to me last night. We were talking about movies and closure and the fantasy of closure. And it reminded me of the Disney princess. But I kind of want Daniel to reiterate that whole idea because it's actually ties in really well to what we're talking about.
Well, thank you. A lot of people go throughout their lives feeling very anxious or feeling very upset or encountering situations in which their feelings are left unresolved, and then they carry that baggage with them throughout the rest of their lives, or they end up reflecting or translating that back into their personal relationships with their families or with their friends or with their coworkers. Or if you're a boss and you have an unresolved trauma in your life, you end up translating that a lot of times into the way you manage your employees. And we have these movies that are written by people who understand the importance of closure to the human psyche, the importance of resolving something or solving a problem. So so the writers or the producers create these scenarios in which a problem is presented and the characters go through the plot and encounter various troubles and trials. And, for instance, if they're not in touch with their feelings or there's an issue between them and their family, and then all of a sudden they go through this massive struggle together. Like, think of, anything with anybody like Die Hard, right? You have a failing marriage or a divorce, and all of a sudden you have somebody hijacking or taking a bunch of hostages on Christmas, which is to a lot of Americans a very important holiday that symbolizes family gatherings. And everybody's brought together under this massive amount of stress, like that you could create a diamond out of. And you have guns and you have explosions and you have people getting shot and you have people dying. And then at the end of the movie, all of a sudden they have a resolution to some of the issues in their relationship because look at what the main character went through. And that's actually very common in a lot of films, either romantic comedies or action films. There's some problem or there's some issue that's resolved through a massive struggle. And oftentimes in real life, what people have are significant struggles or perhaps regular size struggle. I mean, there's a lot of individual variation in regards to how people handle stress and struggles in their lives. And it's determined a lot by socialization or their own personal family lives and their upbringing. So it can be very generational. And essentially you have the inability to resolve trauma or to resolve anxiety or stress in one's own life being temporarily ameliorated by this false narrative or this story in which you see people going through stress that seems to outweigh one's own stress in the moment. Because honestly, how many people in their daily lives of going back and forth to work in an office really have to be concerned with a high, like, not at least in this country, a hijacking of their building, and then by international terror groups, and then basically having to wait for a lone police officer to help solve their problems in the building. I mean, it never really happens like that.
Those are the same people who sit at home thinking that they need to start like protecting or encrypting their hard drives so that the government can't see that email that they wrote to the person that they're talking to every Saturday.
Right. So back to the illusion of closure, you basically have these opportunities for people to suspend their disbelief in regards to how problems are actually resolved. And perhaps on some level, they're being conditioned to wait for that one chance that they have in their lives to reach a certain level of closure without actually examining their own feelings. They're taught to gauge the value of their own feelings based off of these stories that are meant for entertainment purposes only.
I think it sets up dangerous, like Disney princess scenario where people think that these fantasies of closure can actually exist.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. When people are used to the notion of happily ever after, what the fuck does that even mean? The fuck does happily ever after even mean?
Happily ever after for who?
Until when? Until when? Are you saying they never had a fight? Not once? Okay.
Well, you have people constantly smiling, or you have people, you have someone that has to get rescued, or someone has to get saved from themselves, or someone has to get saved from something. And then all of a sudden, everything's okay. And you don't see what happens afterward because there is no afterward. You get to fill in the blanks yourself. And if you're that desperate for happiness in your life and you're not sure how to look inward and resolve your own personal psychological or psychiatric limitations, or you don't have the resources, or you were never taught how to introspect in a healthy way and seek help, then you're going to say, oh, well, what's perfect for me is a time when I never have to fight. And then all of a sudden you get into a relationship where you're fighting all the time and you're very unhappy and you have no idea how to resolve it because you're not taught that it's actually healthy to acknowledge the fact that you're fighting. And maybe it is an unhealthy relationship and you have to find a way to exit it or communicate with the other person, or, people are taught to hold out for a better day, and perhaps a better day will never come, but they're conditioned to believe that a better day is going to come.
And I think in that you're nailing upon the notion of waiting for that day instead of trying to make it happen. That conditioning also comes with putting people in a position of not having agency in their own future. And I think that's not accidental, in that if a person never accomplishes anything, society says it's okay because they never necessarily got that opportunity, instead of being more of the inclination to say, hey, everybody has a chance every day to get on a path to accomplishment, whatever you think accomplishment is. As long as you're on that path working towards that accomplishment, you're doing something. But if you're just waiting for that accomplishment to magically appear, that's okay. You can wait as long as it never appears. That's not your fault. You just never got your window of opportunity. It never showed up. So I think there's a double-edged sword
Oh,
there that
that's terrible. That
makes
that
people complacent.
means that people might have to accept never being the hero of their own story. They're just a
Right.
supporting character. They're just a part of the scenery. They're never the star of their own fucking story. Oh god, that's an insidious just brain disease that's being planted by media if that's the case. Because if somebody only identifies with the sidekick in a movie and they never see themselves as the hero, what kind of message is that sending? Do people really want to be Samwise Ganges? Do people really want to be Boromir? I don't think so.
Well, and I think part of it is like you got to know when to take the role because you can't be Frodo all the time.
Do you really want to be Frodo though?
Like,
I
if
mean,
you want to be Frodo all the time is the issue. I
Yeah.
think sometimes you have to be Frodo when it's your turn.
Yeah.
But that's also why you want to have friends to be like, hey, Sam, hey, I need to do this thing.
I need help.
Um,
I need help doing this.
Yeah, so we need to go find Gandalf and get rid of this motherfucking ring.
Yeah.
But, there's a time when you need to be like, again, you can't always be Frodo.
Yeah, that's true. Although I will admit that I do want to be Doctor Strange at times, and really just stay as Doctor Strange at times, because
I mean,
being able
there's
to
even a
manipulate time.
universe where Tony Stark is Doctor Strange and vice
Yeah.
versa.
I think
So-
that universe would be dope, and I bet they have a really good version of the MCU.
They might actually have it on screen in the upcoming what's it called?
Phase
Scarlet
4.
Witch.
Oh.
Or there's like a what if TV series that they might have it in either one. So
Oh, that's cool.
it's not they actually filmed one scene already where they had switched roles, but it never made it to screen obviously. So it's not something like obviously this is super random, but again, this is where it's like we're in a universe where we're on the cusp of getting fucking RDJ as Doctor Strange after having played Iron Man, so the cross reference is even more relevant.
Yeah.
This timeline isn't that bad.
I'd like to see Mark Ruffalo as Thor. I think he'd make for a very odd, like almost anti-Thor. Because he's so laid back, and Thor is so full of himself. And I love Thor, but let's get a really laid back Thor. It's like, come on, guys, I really don't want to do this. Okay, fine.
Well, just going back briefly to people not seeing themselves as the hero. Perhaps people have been conditioned not to see themselves as the hero in order to rely upon accruing material possessions in order to give them hero status to the people in their lives. Because you see a lot of commercials where people buy the right motor vehicle and their children love it and their children idolize them, or the people buy the right fast food and everybody in their life is happy and they get to be that hero for the day, because really most people are going through their lives feeling absolutely miserable and inadequate and unable to handle those feelings in a way that doesn't involve consuming things.
Yeah. Do kids really know what the right car is, though? Or maybe I'm thinking of it the wrong way. Maybe I'm thinking of it in terms of like what I think is the right car, and I'm not projecting what it's like to be a passenger because I'm rarely the passenger.
No, the car companies or the automobile manufacturers and their ad departments are determining what children are thinking, or at least they're projecting an image that represents the thought process of a child that they've probably put through.
You know that actually explains everything about GM and their shitty cars from the 80s and 90s. They had allowed the projection of the child to seep into their development process, and that's why their cars were like, they could be taken apart and put back together relatively easily, and then had poor tolerances and broke all the time. They were designed for children. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know, that was a bad period for cars. I don't know. It's a bad period for everything because again, I don't know. I don't want to call people stupid, but there's just a period where it's like everybody couldn't see in color correctly, so that's why you get the 90s trying to figure out how to use pastels and neons, because people, it's like in the same way that television was arbitrarily black and white. It's almost as if people's worlds were black and white until the 90s. They started actually starting to see in real color. um and again, I that's the best analogy I can make, just because I don't want to just call people stupid. It's just that it don't seem that they were properly seeing colors. I mean, and obviously colors are a metaphor for nuance, but it's a, you know, we're we're coming into a time when people of a certain age group make it seem as if nuance is painful for them. Maybe it is. Maybe it's physically painful for them to be nuanced. I don't know, but that's what it kind of seems like.
Well, when people think critically and they're faced with contrary ideas as to what they're used to thinking about, or they're forced to understand a concept by expanding their minds, that can often be accompanied with a lot of discomfort. And if people don't embrace that discomfort and handle it in a healthy way, or exercise their mind in a manner that allows them to process an influx of information that challenges their own ideas without getting upset or without responding with vitriol and an assertion that just because they're made to feel uncomfortable by something, it's completely incorrect, and not verifying that information for themselves, or using it as an opportunity to find some primary sources, listen, read some literature, look at some documentaries, and really hear out the other perspective, and then make a decision for themselves. They're keeping themselves from progressing, and then it will be painful for them. And I think a lot of people are taught to recoil from discomfort because there's a pervasive culture of instant gratification and the pursuit of immediate euphoria in order to offset the discomfort or the edge of reality. And a lot of these resources that are made available to people are very superficial and short-lived.
Yeah, I think that's one of those issues where self-reflection is one of those lacking elements that if people did more self-reflection, a lot of these problems would be taken care of. But again, it's like, how do you convince people to do self-reflection, or
Right,
that it's even
right, yeah.
valuable?
Yeah, exactly. That's what I was going to just say. People are so focused on the paradigm of material value that they'll say, well, what's in it for me if I reflect? Am I going to end up with a better paying job? And that means that you're dealing with somebody whose mind has essentially been enslaved by materialism, and somebody whose entire life, by their own hand or by the hand of the culture that they've grown up in, is determined by the material wealth or the material items that they're able to accrue throughout their lives. So you have people going to meditation retreats to relax so that they can actually end up going back to their job and feeling more relaxed. So that way they can earn more, they can feel less stressed out at work when they're dealing with complex issues. There's nothing wrong with that, and there's nothing wrong with meditation for whatever reason. But if the ultimate goal, if the goal is missed to actually disconnect from those things on a long term, or to be able to take those tools and rearrange somebody's mindset long term, instead of using it as an opportunity to learn how to amass wealth on a more short term basis, then the entire exercise is kind of futile, because then people end up saying, oh, well, I tried meditation, but it didn't work out for me, or I tried going to yoga and it didn't work out for me, or, I'm going to a yoga studio and I'm paying for it, and therefore the instruction I receive that I'm paying, depending on where you're at and depending on the cost of living, you can pay up to like $20 or $30 for one session of yoga instruction. And if somebody decides to get a membership or continue along the line of continuing to pay for that instruction long term, then not only is somebody eating into their own resources in order to have some short-term gratification or develop this tool, but basically they're not necessarily addressing the root cause of their stress.
I think that our society tends to preference avoidance or ignorance of things like that. There's a meme going around that says, "I can't believe we didn't beat COVID. We tried ignoring it, everything from ignoring it to pretending that it never happened." And that's we've talked about how meme culture is actually a very accurate reflection of the reality we're facing. Is it's up to the minute practically, and when I read that at first, I laughed. I thought, "Ha ha, that's funny," and then it occurred to me that's actually a really accurate reflection of or an observation of what's going on. People don't want to admit that it's there. They say, "Oh, I don't know anybody who's got that," and by extension, they believe that it's just not. It can't happen to them because they don't know anybody who's got it or even come in contact with it. But then they don't know how many people have been to that gas station that day and touched that door handle. They don't even think about that.
Exactly. They don't even think about it, which means that the level of foresight or the level of an analytical, the type of approach that people are taking, or those types of people are taking to mitigating risks in their daily life isn't accounting for the actions of other people and isn't accounting for the unpredictable nature of existence. They're so couched in comfort, or they try to exactly ignore the source of the risk, or ignore really understanding what is generating the problem.
Yeah.
And if people ignore what is generating the problem, then they're going to be more likely to listen to people who tell them that there isn't a problem to begin with, because it'll just reinforce their current approach, and it won't force them to feel uncomfortable, or they won't be put into a position where they'll have to think critically and perhaps open their minds to the inherent risks of living in a country that is going through a pandemic. And perhaps a lot of people, rightfully so, are feeling very stressed out because of unemployment, because of the impact on the economy, which we've discussed how the economy has essentially been exposed for what it's relied upon, and based off of the pandemic and the impact on various sectors of the consumer structure. There's been a revelation of what the foundations really have been for the past several decades, and where power has truly been moving. But that aside, people aren't really expected, or haven't been expected, to think beyond like tomorrow, or think beyond the next day, or they pay people to make complex decisions for them, or to install their security systems for them, because they're not capable of doing the reading themselves.
That's it, man. And it's a struggle, because again, it's like I don't necessarily even enjoy taking people's money for doing shit like that, but you that's also why then I do this type of shit in my off time, where it's like, well, maybe eventually somebody who I install for will end up listening to my show and be empowered to do that shit for themselves, so I don't have to come back and reinstall some shit. And it's like, I feel like I'm helping people learn how to ride their bike, and I'm the training wheels, but I don't want to be there forever. You don't want to have somebody who's 17-year-olds old riding a bike with training wheels. Like, that's just not right. That's not right.
Well, well, maybe if they've got some like vertigo disorder and they're literally learning how to ride a bike for the first time, maybe there's like a grace period where it's okay, like the first hour. You know, maybe there's some extenuating circumstances. We're not saying that no 17-year-old should, if it's their first time riding a bike and they have poor balance or balance issues, that they shouldn't use the proper tools to develop the right kind of technique and skills. But I think what you're getting at is that it's just, that's not riding a bike if you're a fully functioning adult or a teenager who doesn't have balance issues or vertigo or some other kind of extenuating circumstance that would impair their ability to operate a bicycle properly.
Or also some people, there are people probably who have never learned how to ride a bike before.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Like,
Have you guys not heard of the blind kid that can ride a bike
oh, I'm sure that
with
there's
training wheels?
I actually saw a documentary, or maybe it was a news piece about somebody who was blind who could ride a bike and could
Using
navigate.
echolocation?
yeah, that they would
location,
click
yeah.
with their
Guess what?
pallet.
He didn't have fucking training wheels.
No, he didn't. He didn't have training wheels.
But
Yeah.
he's also got enhanced. He probably has some kind of enhanced balance coordination.
Not really. If you watch him, he's like shaking the entire way. But again, he didn't have training wheels. So that's all I'm saying is like, I didn't mean to make it an ableist, because in my head I'm thinking like I have examples of people who are blind that can ride a bike without training wheels. So that's where my commentary is.
Oh, I don't mean like I don't.
No, I know. I'm saying
Yeah.
it for the audience, because there's times when people make commentary that is ableist, and I try not to make ableist commentary.
Yeah.
But that is to discuss somebody who has no eyesight that can ride a bike without training wheels.
Well, I mean,
Everybody look it up.
I
That
think-
person is amazing.
I don't think that,
I don't know his name.
I think that everyone who can ride a bike, who during their childhood, if they didn't close their eyes while riding at least once and just feel the air and the sun on their face, they missed out. I think that's like a critical part of being young and feeling indestructible, is that I'm riding this bike, I can just close my eyes. Maybe it correlates to having watched Star Wars and thinking that the Force was real. But I think that's just for some people that's a rite of passage, and for some people riding a bike is something that they could never do. Like my mom, she has zero depth perception. I remember watching her try to ride a bike when I was young, and she was very clearly terrified, and I was like not that old, and I could tell that she didn't feel comfortable riding a bicycle. And I also remember her walking through campus one day when I was young, and she said, I asked her why she didn't drive, and she said, oh, one time I drove the car, Jerry was giving me a lesson, and I drove the car over an embankment. And another time, and she said that her depth perception was so poor that she walks into, walls and pillars and doorways sometimes. And I've seen it happen. So that's a completely different set of circumstance, though. That's not like a balance issue. That's more of a eyesight concern.
Right, and this also ties in, I think, to what we were talking about in terms of people using the service-based economy in order to just accomplish things without having to learn what's being accomplished. Because I'm absolutely certain that there are people who rely upon the service economy because they're physically unable, or they have a challenge in their lives that prevents them from accomplishing certain tasks. So they need somebody to accomplish these tasks for them. And it's not to say that the entire every single element of an economy that has an element of service in it is detrimental or negative, depending on it all depends on the audience and the recipient. I think what needs to merit some more discussion and maybe an inversion is the utilization of people who work in the service industry or who provide services or specializations as an educational experience. So, when somebody is getting a sound system installed, or if somebody is installing a security system for somebody. It's not just, okay, now here it is, here it's done, you pay me and I leave. It should be a matter of, okay, this is how you maintain it. This is your opportunity to get educated about it, and people aren't interested in getting educated about it. But if there is a way to generate some interest in expanding one's knowledge about the resources that they're taking advantage of, and simply, having spent most of their lives paying for as like a one-off or a once-a-year maintenance kind of cycle, then I think that there would actually be a lot more critical thinking ingrained into the collective culture.
I think that's definitely spot on, and I think there are examples of that in I think it's like the Geek Squad that have done training programs when it's like certain stuff on your computer. I think that they'll show you like I think it's like PowerPoint or Microsoft Word, or there's like some simple programs that I think if you buy your computer there, you can get them to show you things. So, or like if they're working on it, you know. So I think that is definitely in line with how commercial organizations are going to need to operate. If we're going to have a better, well, I think the economy is going to actually depend on it, because these businesses are going to get stuck in life cycles that will get exposed, and that's kind of where if your life cycle depends on having a stupid customer, then you basically give your business a shelf life that's tied to your customers' earning capacity, and that's like the ultimate point of diminishing returns that this paradigm has come upon. Is like, yeah, you can have stupid customers that you take advantage of, but eventually that person's going to lose their job because the economy is going to leave them behind, and then they're not going to be able to support your stupid product anymore.
And then there are only so many extra wealthy people who can constantly afford to pay somebody else to do things for them, especially as they get older and their resources diminish, and their annuity only covers so much, but it doesn't account for the actual rate of inflation and things like that. But you reminded me that when I was taking some computer classes like a decade ago, one of the instructors I had, she was the department head, but she said something like, it's important to know how to rescale the desktop. And I remember someone saying, why? We're just getting higher resolution screens all the time. And she said, yeah, but people get old and their eyesight diminishes, and that it deteriorates. And I chuckled about it, but I find myself increasing the size of text while I also have a giant screen and high resolution monitor. That's not the point. The point is that there will always be computer users out there who are trying to have a better quality of computing experience. And if when I know the answer to something like my dad, when he has a question about this stuff and he asks me and I know the answer, I just tell him. I say, hey, this is the answer. This is where I found it. This is the process I went through. And if I'm at their house and something's happening, I can just respond immediately. I think that's the kind of thing. I wish and hope that that's the culture of computer tech support that's being developed. Because at some point when I get fucking old and I'm unable to keep up with technology, and I'm projecting a period of time probably in towards the end of the twilight phase of my life, where I was like, can't even learn how to use an operating system. And believe me, I fear this, but I also welcome it, because I think that it means I'm going to be like in my 90s. But when the time comes that I don't know how to reconfigure my device or reconfigure the computer, or I can't remember, these are the commands that you got to say to it to do it, because there's no more physical interface. I hope somebody is patient enough with me to help me with those things, and not like, make me feel like, oh, how old man, you can't keep up.
Yeah, and this plays perfectly into discussing how we reshape our educational paradigm, especially in regards to technology, to empower this and future generations to continue to understand and be able to engage productively the technologies that they use on a regular basis in a productive manner, and then be able to essentially establish a safety net or a series of resources that are meant for people who have maintained an understanding, or simply know where to go, or even if people haven't maintained an understanding, just the resources that are meant to easily explain or convey these concepts.
Yeah, because then the more I think there's this element of we need service in our economy as a job because we've outsourced so much of the production. So now service is like one of the only things that you can do, whether it's the Geek Squad itself or, the idea of a Microsoft store or an Apple Genius store. That's a service thing, and that's what people are buying. And that's why Microsoft is shutting that shit down because Microsoft sold or they wanted to provide a service to a crowd that did not need that service, who bought their machines because they wanted to service them themselves. So the Microsoft store never should have existed. That was just a stupid mistake. So that's where
they wanted to be like
Genius
Apple.
Stores are there to service people who want to buy that service.
Yeah.
They're two completely different crowds. Microsoft is just trying to keep up with the Joneses and say, Apple has a Genius store. A Genius bar. We need to keep up with them and make sure that if Apple has a storefront, we have to have a storefront, or else that makes us look bad. Well, guess what, Microsoft? Now you're closing down all your fucking stores because you didn't know your audience.
Yeah. It still blows my mind the difference in what it takes to work on a Windows machine versus the complexity that Apple bakes into their systems. Like, it's not hard to find the keyboard shortcuts to reset your PR and VRAM, or to engage target disk mode, or to do any of the Genius level points of access or features. These are just things that they've been around since day one. Actually, a lot of them have. Like resetting your NV or PR RAM. Like, that stuff's been there since the beginning, and that's what you do when you have a problem. You hit Control, Command, and PR, or that's not even the point, really. The point is they've managed to create a culture of people that don't even know how to use their machines and rely on the Apple Genius. And I'm not saying that all Apple users are like that, because I knew how to do that stuff, and it wasn't that hard. It was just, I wonder what kind of keyboard commands exist in OS X or OS X, and lo and behold, there are pages of them. And they even make applications that reveal all the keyboard commands if you press whatever key you set to show you the list on the screen, so you can teach yourself how to become a keyboard ninja on OS X. And these functions can exist in Windows. You just have to set them yourself practically. But once you know these things, lo and behold, you don't have to touch a mouse, unless you feel like it, once you know how to navigate through a keyboard. And then you find that it's just like in the movies, the hacker movies, where you see a bunch of windows open and close and stuff happens, but they're just typing the whole time. That's possible with a GUI. It just requires some reading and some time spent becoming familiar with keystrokes and key groups. And sometimes you have to take the next step and get a macro-capable keyboard. But once you do that, lo and behold, you've just unlocked the secrets of the universe without having to learn how to use a Unix command line. And that's actually pretty cool. And anyone can do that. It's actually it's a really fun process, because by the time you're done and comfortable with keyboard entry, all of a sudden you can do things on a computer at the speed that the computer is like, hey, finally I'm able to run. No more walking around for me. And right. That's a really cool feeling. I think that there was a long period of time where I remember being called a computer nerd or a computer dork or a computer geek, and there's been some pretty considerable efforts to undo that kind of super user shaming, which always seemed really awkward to me. It's like, okay, this group of people is going to talk shit to me until they need me to fix their computer, and then that's why I'm going to charge them, $40, $50, $60 an hour, or just tell them that their laptop is crap, and I
I
can't do
build
anything
the
about
thing
it.
that you're gonna use to talk shit about me on.
Oh, really?
I'm saying, like, the people who build the computers are building the things that these people then turn around and use to make fun of computer nerds. It's
Well, that's
like,
what I mean. It's like we're the ones who have in the past who would fix people's computers. It's like, hey, my mom's computer's messed up. Can you take a look at it? It's like, what? I came over to hang out. Why? Like in high school or something. Like, what? I came over to hang out. What? What's okay? Fine, whatever. Because it just means that your friend's mom is going to be like even cooler with you than before, or that's I guess that's actually not a very. That's actually a pretty real example, actually, because I've had to fix people's computers before. But but that's the thing. There was a culture that treated computer users and advanced computer users like somehow they were socially inept or were somehow lacking in something. But the reality is, here we are, a decade, 2 decades later, and people who can code, people who learned how to code as children, are in charge of the world. And people who don't realize that the way that math is being taught now and that language is being taught now is a gateway to coding and unlocking the information economy for themselves. This is something I noticed when lockdown happened, when containment efforts were first initiated. There were a lot of people who were fighting for the essential jobs, largely because there was no access point for them to engage in the information economy. And it sets up a really dangerous scenario where, if we've got to deal with rolling lockdowns for the next, year, 2, 3 years, whatever, how long it takes to develop a vaccine or a viable treatment that's easy to deploy, that doesn't cost a lot, that doesn't bankrupt people. Essential jobs are going to remain, and the information economy is going to be the only way out. And if you can't gain access to the information economy through education, which is continually being defunded, I think recently Devos said something about taking away money from public schools to help private schools.
Well, you bring up a great point in terms of how education or people who are educated beyond what is typically required by an underfunded educational system are denigrated for their education. There's been a consistent lack of reinvestment of resources into local economies and local educations. So that way you have broad groups of people from multiple demographics who are not exposed to any level of higher analysis or anything beyond a moderate amount of indoctrination about certain topics. And again, it gates them from being able to consciously access the information economy and consciously access pathways that allow them to develop beyond the requirements or the requisite skills of the service industry. And then essentially they get left behind, or they get affected by situations like these rolling lockdowns.
Yeah, the whole idea of the rolling lockdown actually it's really kind of unnerving to me, because it means that it's acquiescing to a population that refuses to accept the reality of the situation, and that we've got a plague on our hands, and we've figured out a way to help reduce the spread of the plague by a factor of 5, and it's a mask. And I've got this image on the slideshow. It refers to Schrodinger's mask, the mask that is simultaneously too flimsy to protect us from germs and viruses and bacteria, and yet is so strong that it can contain oxygen and carbon dioxide and causes breathing difficulty. And we've got a solution. It exists. It's readily accessible. It doesn't even have to be the fancy N95 or P100 or N99 mask. It doesn't even have to be any of that stuff. It can be as simple as a cloth mask. It can be made out of denim, and denim has a higher resistance to allowing particles to pass through than a lot of materials. add 2 layers of fabric, 3 layers of fabric, but none of these things are actually going to impede one's ability to breathe. I just read about a guy who runs in, I think he's an Olympian, who ran a race in Oregon, and he wore a mask the whole time because he's got asthma.
So hold on. We can't say it doesn't impede people's
Oh, you're right.
capacity to breathe, because I just got done installing somebody's security system and was getting lightheaded from having it on for an hour. But guess what? I'm not taking it off. But the issue is it becomes difficult to discuss it, because it's yeah, guess what? If you wear it for an hour, you're gonna start getting fucking lightheaded if your mask is actually doing the job, because you're not getting the proper amount of oxygen. But you're not gonna actually die from that low level, that amount of reduction in oxygen is not fatal. It's not fatal. It just causes slight discomfort and may cause slight dizziness. It's not fatal.
I've been wearing an oximeter around the house as I wear masks or do stuff, and I've been watching it because I wanted to see what all this stuff really does to me. The other day I made a shake with 4 tablespoons of was it 4? No, it was 2.5 tablespoons of ground ginger, and it made my heart rate increase by 30 BPM, and which pushed my oxygen sat all the way up to full oxygen saturation. But putting on the mask, it only dropped my oxygen sat by 2%. And I'm sure that over a period of time, if I'd have been really active, that would have changed things. But the times that I've tested this, it doesn't drop down very much. It doesn't drop nearly as much as if I crouch down into the fetal position and breathe really shallowly until I almost fall asleep. Or if I sit in with horrible posture and compress my lungs and reduce my ability to draw air into my lungs. It's actually, it's not, I wouldn't say it's that bad. I feel pretty, I'm actually concerned more for frontline healthcare workers who have to do the double mask, the N95 plus the surgical mask.
Yeah, for sure.
Because,
and again, that's where it's I'm not trying to say don't wear a mask. My issue is we can't say, oh, there's no breathing effect because we've had this person do a marathon and this one person who's got perfect fucking VO2 consumption.
Yeah.
Nothing happened to them.
We also
that's why I'm I just got done installing and was doubled over from oxygen loss or from not being able to get enough oxygen. But that's where I'm I still was able to be conscious or cognizant, but it definitely I work out a lot.
But were you aware that we have an ozone warning today?
No, but again, that's what I'm saying. It's
so that's an air quality issue.
I'm not. It's not an air quality issue because I'm not having that problem without my mask on. I'm sitting in my home.
Yeah, but
and if I was doing, if I was on the treadmill without my mask on, I don't get that same problem. I just worked out yesterday. We worked out for an hour, high intensity. I did not even get close to having the lack of oxygen problem that I did today while working and wearing a mask. But guess what? I'm still gonna wear a fucking mask is my point.
Yeah.
What I'm saying is you can't act like it's not uncomfortable. It's very uncomfortable. It definitely causes breathing issues. If your mask is good enough, if it's actually high quality, it is gonna make it harder to breathe.
Well,
and that's why you can't blow out a flame when you're wearing a mask, because it makes it harder to pull and push air, but it's not gonna knock you out.
Yeah. I don't worry about it. I have a mask that actually seals to my face and has a replaceable cartridge-based filter. And when I take that thing off, I've got this rim around my face where you can tell that it's been on my face. Same for the goggles that I use when I go to the store, because I'm not taking any fucking chances. I get pneumonia easily, and I'm not trying to die. And when I go to Kroger, I see people that don't wear masks, and it blows my mind because it's they just don't give a fuck. They don't even care. And so you know about the Saharan sand plume, the dust plume that we've got walking or crawling across the country right now?
Yep.
So, that's silicate-based sand, ocean sand. It's not going to be good for our soil. It's definitely not good. Silicate in the lungs causes breathing difficulty. it'll fuck you up. It's tiny little razor blades of glass. And so I see that on the horizon. I see the air quality index like drop. I see people driving their gigantic trucks and rolling coal just to get up to 35 or 40 miles an hour. And it's like, really, was that really necessary? That was like, $1 worth of fuel just to go 40 miles an hour for a quarter of a mile before they get to the bottom of a hill where they have to slow down anyways.
Well, a lot of people, what we have is an example of a lot of people acknowledging mortality in different ways.
Actually, 1 minute.
All right. People acknowledging or just not acknowledging mortality. I think people are having a difficult time wearing masks, not wearing masks, because they don't want to acknowledge that there's actually a problem. And again, brings it back to confirmation bias. Any example that they can use to reinforce their immortality or their invulnerability because they're unable to introspect and see beyond their own lives leads to a great deal of discomfort.
Exceptional Randos show is produced live in Sunroom Studios' Base Capsule and in partnership with KLST 103.5, RadioCallisti.org. Remember to catch our Exceptional Randos live stream on YouTube every Sunday between 2 and 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And if you have a story, idea, or a question that you would like to share, we want to hear from you. Thanks for listening.